If you were flying on the coast of India, about 2,500 kilometers southwest, if you look down out of the plane, you might just be lucky enough to see this tiny island, the island of Picobar. It's only about 10 kilometers long, and it's dominated at its northern end by these extraordinary volcanic peaks. The slopes of those peaks are clothed with very dense rainforest. And within those rainforests, we find an incredible range of biodiversity. This list here shows some of the unique species that have been identified within those rainforests of Picobar. Now, Picobar has only been inhabited for about 50 years now, and during that half century, many of these species, probably around 50 or so, have already gone extinct due to human disturbance. Now, many programs have been set up on Picobar to try and manage this loss of biodiversity, and the group that I'm working with has been focusing on one particular species, the Picobar Tree Frog. It lives in those rainforests at the mid-altitudes. It's diurnal, insectivorous, but most important, of course, is that its population has been undergoing a dramatic decline in the last decade. Now, we're trying to manage the population decline, trying to halt this population decline of the Picobar Tree Frog. And in trying to do so, one of the central questions that we're asking is what is actually, of course, causing the decline of the tree frog. Now, two proposals have been put forward to explain the decline of the tree frog. The first is focused around this rat snake, which was introduced onto the island about a decade ago. Now, the rat snake is a potential predator of the tree frog, but whether it actually eats them, no one knows. The second proposal is focused on this red beetle, the Picobar Lady Beetle. Now, its own population has been suffering a massive decline due to a fungal epidemic, which again started about 1 decade ago on Picobar. So the main aim of the study that I will be telling you about today is to try to answer the question, is the population decline of the Picobar tree frog due to increased predation or decreased prey? So how do we go about getting some insights into this question? Well, to begin with, to focus on the predation angle, we reasoned that if the rat snake is responsible for the decline of these tree frogs, then we should find evidence of the snakes eating the frogs. Now, this might seem a very simple-minded question, but given the bright coloration of the skin of this particular frog, it does raise the doubt whether its skin contains glands with toxins in it, as many other brightly coloured frogs also do. Brought us to our first experimental question, which was, do rat snakes kept under captive conditions presented with tree frogs actually eat them? Now, moving to the insect side of the equation. So we know that the lady beetle numbers have declined, but we also know that there's many other insects available in the forest, perhaps about 1,400 other species, some of which are going to be apparently suitable for the tree frogs. So the decline in lady beetle numbers can only be having an impact on the tree frog numbers if the tree frogs have a particular preference for the lady beetles versus all the other insects within their environment. So experimentally, we looked again at tree frogs in captivity to see whether they did show a strong dietary preference for the lady beetles. So what were our setups like? So this shows the first one for the rat snake test. So there were 20 chambers, 1 rat snake in each chamber. It was a bimodal temperature regime, and the snakes were starved for 1 month. At the end of the month, an equal number of Picobar tree frogs and another type of frog, the brown frog, which is a known diet item of the rat snake, were introduced into the chamber. Now, the rat snakes targeted the brown frogs, ate all of them, but even after a week, none of the tree frogs had been touched. So it would seem that the answer to our first objective question is no. The captive rat snakes don't eat Picobar tree frogs. Now moving to the insect side of the story. Again, 20 chambers, each with one frog, 27 degrees, and the frogs were starved for a single day. After that, into each chamber, we introduced equal numbers of the Picobar Lady Beetle and 4 other insects from the forest. We found that the tree frogs targeted the lady beetles, ate them all, nearly, and apart from some preference for the brown beetles, the other 3 types of insects were left basically uneaten. So it would seem that the answer to our second objective is yes, the Picobar tree frog does show, at least in captivity, a strong preference for the Picobar lady beetles. So what do these experimental results mean for what's happening out in the forest? We feel fairly confident that our experimental results with rat snakes indicate that they're probably not doing anything out there in the forest. Captive studies of snake diet are thought to be fairly reliable. We know that the snakes were actually hungry because they ate the brown frogs. And of course, there is also the question about whether the bright coloration of the tree frog skin indicates a toxin, perhaps in skin glands. And that's something we're looking into investigating right now. Now, the data is consistent with the role for lady beetle decline, but it's not very conclusive at this point. We only presented 4 of the other insects that are available and apparently fairly suitable as diet items for the tree frogs. And there's, as I mentioned previously, perhaps 1,400 other species out there. So to get an idea of whether this preference for the lady beetle is playing a part in the forest, we are setting up a video study looking at what the frogs are actually eating. And so far, the results have been fairly suggestive that the frogs actually are targeting in the forest the lady beetles as well. So in terms of management, what does this mean? On the results of the diet preference study, we're now trying to build a fungal resistant strain of the lady beetles for release into the wild. Whether or not that works, we're continually increasing the volume of tree frogs coming out of our captive breeding program. We're hoping that with these 2 measures, and together with our ongoing research program, that the future of this beautiful frog will once again be as bright as its brilliant, if rather unpalatable, skin. Thank you for your attention.